Hey there, welcome back to another review. This time around, it is my review of the 1978 made-for-TV thriller, Someone's Watching Me. Now, Someone's Watching Me is the television film debut of John Carpenter. This is actually the first made-for-television film that he did, and he actually directed this before he did Halloween. This is his second film that he worked on after Assault on Precinct 13. It was technically also his first involvement with the studio because this was a film that was, I believe, a Warner Brothers movie for their television um, output. It was initially aired on NBC in 1978 on November 29th. Now, John Carpenter not only wrote the film, but he also directed it. Carpenter's direction in this is really good. I mean, it's John Carpenter. I mean, for a TV movie, there are some really tense, really thrilling moments of Hitchcockian suspense. There are some really nice sequences that are very well shot. There's a sequence in particular where Lauren Hutton's character is hiding from the killer, and she's hiding underneath a floor grate, and there's a great shot of her being scared and terrified with the shadow of the grate in front of her face, and just the way that sequence is shot is just masterful. The scene near the end where Lauren Hutton is actually hanging out of a real window in a real skyscraper is also very accomplished. And there's a lot of other shots that are just really well done. In a lot of ways, you can kind of look at this film as Carpenter's Hitchcock, a film. This has kind of a Rear Window vibe to it because of the fact that you have this woman who's being watched by this stranger in a apartment complex across from hers, and she's also kind of watching him while he's watching her. So, that kind of back and forth. And there's just some really nice looking shots from the floor or the ground looking up at the skyscraper. Really great establishing shots, really nice looking shots of the apartment to kind of give it its own environment, its own feel. Overall, it does not look like a TV movie, and that's in large part due to John Carpenter and his ability as a director. In fact, some of the directing elements in this he would actually incorporate in Halloween. In fact, he went on to say that Someone's Watching Me was very integral when it comes to his development as a director, because techniques that he learned and he applied for this film, he would apply for other films later on in his career. So, yeah, I think this is definitely some of his most underrated directorial work. I don't think Carpenter gets discussed enough when it comes to what he did here with very little money and a very tight shoot. And It has that signature Carpenter style to it, that look, that feel, that aesthetic. The only thing that's missing is the Carpenter score. The film is written by John Carpenter as well, and I think John Carpenter did a great job writing this. There were some really just clever, smart, witty, fun lines of dialogue that just make a lot of these characters pop and make them memorable and enjoyable to watch. I really especially admire and just love the way that he wrote the lead, Lee Michaels. She's a strong, independent woman who won't take any gruff from anybody, won't take anyone's shit, but it's done in a way that is charming. Carpenter did a great job making this character very likable, as well as sexy, as well as strong, but not in ways that come across as forced, not in ways that come across as obnoxious, which happens a lot with a lot of other writers nowadays when they're writing this kind of character. I think the setup of the stalker is interesting, of this guy who's sending her these gifts and sending her letters from this company called Excursions Unlimited, telling her that she's entered a sweepstakes to win a trip and to win all these other things. And he starts sending her stuff, and initially seems kind of sweet and maybe nothing really that serious, but then it gets more and more crazy. The guy gets more and more attached. She starts trying to break things off with the guy and even changes her phone number, but he still finds a way to find her number and find out how to get to her, and then starts getting not only to her but the people around her, including her new boyfriend, who's this guy who works as a college professor, um, which I really liked that character by the way. Well, I liked that dynamic that Carpenter wrote for those two characters as well. Um, Trying to remember. She met this guy, Paul. I believe that's who it is. Yeah, played by David Birney. Yeah, Paul. Paul Winkless is the love interest. And another dynamic I really like that Carpenter created for this script is the dynamic between Adrienne Barbeau's character Sophie and Lee, because I felt they had some good chemistry, had some good moments, and I also love the way that Sophie is written, because Sophie is a character that's way ahead of her time. Carpenter made Sophie a lesbian, but did it in a way that wasn't insulting, wasn't there as a gimmick. She was just a strong, spunky character who made quick acquaintances with Lee. They became fast friends, and she happened to be a lesbian, and that's it. I really love that. I really liked that about uh, uh, the way that Carpenter handled that character. That's another thing that not only was that ahead of its time in terms of representation. I mean, this is 1978 we're talking about, but it's also ahead of its time in terms of how he represented this character, how he wrote this character. And I think it's something that I feel even today could be utilized a lot more when it comes to writing these kinds of characters with uh, these traits or these elements to them and their sexuality. Um, you have other moments here and there that I think are rather effective, sort of the cat and mouse sort of stuff where Lee finds out where her stalker lives and then goes to his home and finds all the recording equipment, all this other stuff, or and it's this sort of race against time to, you know, get to his home, get what she needs for evidence before the guy comes back. Or even prior to that, the scene with Sophie when she's over in this other apartment. Actually, she's over in Lee's apartment, watching Lee as she's going to where she feels the stalker is at, because they made a mistake earlier and they caught the wrong guy, which is another element of the script I really like, the whole red herring aspect of it. And that's a really intense, suspenseful sequence where she's already vulnerable. Lee going to this strange apartment by herself with only, I think, like a little knife in her hand. And then her friend is vulnerable. Her friend Sophie is now by herself in Lee's apartment. And that turns out to be not good for Sophie, because while Lee is over there snooping around in the other guy's apartment, the stalker is over in Lee's apartment and strangles Sophie. So yeah, that didn't turn out too well for Sophie. But I do like that the way that that's set up by Carpenter. And there's just a lot of stuff with this script that I really like. Even like the finale. Uh, I like how genuinely nail biting the suspense is in that moment. And I like how Lee gets a nice moment where she gets to stab the killer with a shard of glass. Um, but yeah, overall, I really like the script. Even the whole sort of stuff with the police not being so cooperative initially, kind of not buying into Lee's stories about the stalker and thinking it's not that big of a deal. where, Hunt is just like, oh, come on now, I can't do anything about this until he does something. Him sending you all these letters and sending you things in the mail, I can't do anything about that. And that's something that rings very true now. Like, because there's a lot of that stuff that still happens to this day. And you get a lot of the responses, a lot of the same responses from the police, where you file a complaint and they're like, well, I can't really do anything, sorry, until something happens. And then I get it, but a lot of the time, once something happens, it's too late. It's too late. The stalker has killed the person that he stalked, or uh, has sexually assaulted them or something. And it's just one of those things where it's like, maybe you should be a little more proactive. I don't know. Maybe it's something to do with I get it. You don't want to catch the wrong person. You don't want to get too involved in that area. But it's just one of those things that just seems like they don't do enough. They think like the stuff that's escalating to a violent act is not going to escalate to a violent act the majority of the time. When, if you look at a lot of these instances, if the person who's doing these things, sending these creepy letters, doing all these creepy things and stalking somebody, if they get the address, if they find out where somebody lives and they get them in a vulnerable spot, it will lead to something violent and something where a law is eventually broken. So I don't know, maybe try to be a little more proactive. Films like this are a good example of that. If the police actually tried to do more or did a better job and didn't capture the wrong guy and ruin the guy's life, that's another aspect of the script I was really surprised by, is that Carpenter actually threw in that little bit where the police screwed up so bad that they thought they got the guy who was stalking Lee, uh, but this guy was completely innocent, and he was maybe a little bit of a creeper, but not to the extent that the stalker was. And he definitely didn't deserve having his entire life ruined. He lost his job. He was essentially forced to move out of his home and out of state. And that's a little touch that you don't always necessarily see in these kind of films, showing the police just absolutely, completely, royally fuck it up. And another touch that I like that Carpenter added to this film, which, by the way, the script was loosely based on a real story, by the way, a real story of a woman who was stalked. And he added the bit that the stalker was actually a maintenance man, a guy who goes around and does maintenance and, has keys to all these different apartment complexes. And I thought that was a nice touch. So overall, I thought it was a great script, especially for a TV movie. Um, Really good cast too. I mean, Lauren Hutton is just lovely. She's lovely to look at in this. Her performance is just fantastic, amazing. I've always been a fan of Lauren Hutton's. I think she's a great performer. I think she's got a certain magnetic charisma to her that is uniquely her own. And it's definitely evident here. She's strong, she's confident, she's sexy. I just love watching her in this movie. This is actually, according to Lauren Hutton herself, I believe it's her favorite role, and her favorite film of hers. And I can kind of see why. I really can. Um, David Birney, he's pretty good too. He's nice as Paul, the guy who falls in love with Lee. I think the two of them have some good romantic sparks with one another. And he's not a total sad sack, a total loser. Like, he can hold his own in some moments too. Adrienne Barbeau is just a blast. Just absolutely such a compelling performer, and this performance is no exception as Sophie. This was actually the first film that Carpenter did with Barbeau, and this is actually where they met and where they eloped, and this is what led to them eventually getting married. Charles Cyphers, who was also in Halloween later, he was also in Assault on Precinct 13. He plays the police captain, Gary Hunt, who is very reluctant to get involved, and then once he does, it's honestly kind of too late. Um, nice, typical gruff, but still kind of charming performance by Charles Cyphers. And you have this other guy named Steve. I think that might have been like the guy. There was some other guy named Steve who is like I forgot what character that guy was. He was no one really that important. And then you have an actor who actually plays the stalker, the killer, Herbert Stiles, who's played by George Skaff. And you don't really see a lot with that guy. He doesn't really get a lot of dialogue. He just kind of shows up near the end, and definitely not the kind of look for the stalker that I was expecting. It's kind of middle aged, balding. I don't know. Maybe I was expecting maybe a little bit younger of a stalker for some reason, but what they have here still works. I think the guy is still um, rather intimidating of a presence, and in large part, I don't necessarily think it's necessarily the actor is playing that role. It's more likely how Carpenter is shooting the actor playing the role, but it's still effective. And yeah, it's a good cast. Headlined by the star of the show and Lauren Hutton. Um, the music by Harry Sukman. It doesn't suck. It's actually pretty all right. I'm not gonna say it's great. It's not one of my favorite scores. I would have liked to have heard what Carpenter would have came up with when it comes to this movie, but it's still decent enough. And there were some moments where it definitely does add to the tension. It adds to the suspense, adds to some of the thrills in the movie. But yeah, I mean, it's even a film that I think goes by at a pretty good pace for a TV movie. It's like 97 minutes. So it's not that long or that tedious of a set. And I would say this is right up there with some of the other strong TV movies from this era, like the Kolchak TV movies and so on. I wouldn't say that it's as good as some of Carpenter's other classic films. I'm not going to say it's on par with Halloween or some of the other films in his filmography, but I will say that it's still a really solid thriller that is a nice little entry in his filmography. And I would say that if you're a fan of his, this is definitely one of those films that has kind of been forgotten about. And I think that fans should rediscover it if they haven't already. And I think even if you're not super big on John Carpenter, which I don't know of anybody that it isn't a big fan of his, but if you're kind of on the fence about him, I think uh, you should give this a watch too, because it is a little bit more of a Hitchcockian kind of thriller. There are some Carpenter elements to it, but it's not as prevalent here as it is in maybe some of his other films. So if you're not a big fan of his sort of humor, maybe if you're not a fan of his style of sort of injecting some camp into the horror and the suspense, then this might be more up your alley, because it's definitely played a lot more straight most of the time, despite the fact that there are some uh, fun little moments of dialogue or moments of levity that are sprinkled at certain points in the film. But anyway, I really don't know what else to say about Someone's Watching Me, except thanks for watching my review. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.